reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget in the White House before it's given to Congress. And they said, well, your testimony needs to be consistent with the president's budget. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Mark Bowen, I'd like to ask you, in that clip we had of James Connaughton, he was also the White House Council on Environmental Quality. His staff particularly were the ones who also edited immediately after the 9/11 attacks the press releases from the EPA about the health and safety situation that the public was exposed to, and an IG report later made clear that the White House had downplayed and inappropriately the health risks that people face. In your research on Dr. Hansen, to what degree is there a widespread practice throughout the Bush administration in terms of how they deal with science and the putting out of science information to the public?
It's everywhere. It's all over the place. Right after Jim went public there in late January, there was a meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in San Francisco. And the Union of Concerned Scientists organized a little side meeting, which was completely filled, just overflowing with scientists from all over the government telling similar incidents. And at that meeting, David Baltimore, who was he was president-elect of the association at the time, he said that he wasn't surprised. Every time he heard a new incident, he wasn't surprised to hear it. He said it was the result of a theory of government. And he was talking, of course, about this kind of imperial presidency, the unitary executive, that sort of thing. He said, there's a chapter of the book entitled A Theory of Government that we must vociferously oppose. That's a quote from David Baltimore's speech. It would be boring to go into the litany of public agencies, everything from the Fish and Wildlife Service to the EPA to the FDA, that have experienced similar control of scientific information.
I wanted to turn to Philip Cooney, the former chief of staff at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. He also testified at that House hearing last year. He was questioned by Representative Henry Waxman, the chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee.
Mr. Cooney, you had a senior position at the White House, but there were officials in the White House who were more senior to you. Your immediate boss was James Connaughton, chairman of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Was Mr. Connaughton aware of your role in proposed edits for climate change reports?
He knew that we were reviewing reports as they came in ordinarily from OMB for review.
Did he personally review your edits?
No, not most.
Mr. Chairman, did you discuss...
Mr. Chairman, his boss is behind him and is available.
Excuse me, but I have the time. I didn't interrupt you. I waited till you were finished and then I interrupted you. Did you discuss the edits with him?
No, not ordinarily.
Did he give you any instructions about how any of these three documents should be edited?
No, he understood that my objective was to align these communications with the administration's stated policy.
Philip Cooney had come from the American Petroleum Institute, worked at the White House until 2005, and then left to return to a familiar haunt, taking a job as a corporate issues manager with ExxonMobil. Mark Bowen, talk about the email trail and the documentation you have of Philip Cooney, of James Connaughton, of how the White House censored the reports.
First of all, it's very clear that James Connaughton was playing a very definite role in editing those reports. His name is all over it. Even Karl Rove is involved at one point. Not so much in the report, but in actually it was in early on. I think it was when Christy Whitman was still the administrator of the EPA. She was very embattled because she was actually in favor of doing something about global warming. It became known, and this was what caused Philip Cooney to lose his job, it became known that the CEQ, Council on Environmental Quality, was editing a climate subsection of a report on the environment by EPA. When that went public, a disgruntled EPA employee brought it public, there was, of course, a major response by the White House. It was at that time that Karl Rove became involved, actually, and encouraged and helped Philip Cooney figure out how to respond to the media. But yeah, the email trail is quite clear that not only was Philip Cooney, James Connaughton, there was a fellow named William O'Donovan, I think he was. He was a special assistant to the vice president on domestic policy, who also left the government to go work for Shell shortly thereafter, who was involved. And they were exchanging emails on a regular basis with people from ExxonMobil, from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and so on and so forth, in which they were, they were kind of these funny, joking emails in which they were poking fun, calling people names, including calling Jim Hansen names, and figuring out responses to these discomforting things that were coming up in the media. But the whole policy was very clearly worked out by this kind of gang of people. And I think in that same hearing in which Philip Cooney was testifying with Jim, by the way, there's an amazing picture that I've received from the New York Times with Jim Hansen holding his hand up, with George Deutsch on one side of him and Philip Cooney on the other. That was how Jim testified at that hearing. There was a Democratic congressman from Kentucky named Yarmouth, who revealed that the staff members from Waxman's committee had gotten access to a whole bunch of communications between the Council on Environmental Quality, Philip Cooney, and the Vice President's office. And he read from one of them. It became clear that there was a lot of communication going on a regular basis with the Vice President's office. And what this prompted was a lawyer from CEQ to stand up. And basically, there was about a 15-minute discussion. James Connaughton also stood up. This is while Philip Cooney was testifying, and made it clear that the committee was not allowed to use that information because they were invoking executive privilege to keep any communications with the Vice President off the record. But there's a lot of evidence somewhere, and Mr. Yarmouth very slyly managed to get it into the record. What he did was he read from a hand transcription of an email that one of his staffers had been allowed to look at but not use as part of the record in the hearing.
And James Hansen, when all this was going on, you're a career scientist. What your fellow scientists in NASA and other parts of the government, what was their reaction to to the advisability of you standing up and how they felt about it, as well as to how they acted when this kind of censorship or muzzling of their viewpoints was occurring?
Well, I think a discouraging thing is that people have come to accept this, to expect it, and I think we have to strongly object to this. It's interesting that in the thing you just showed where Phil Cooney said, well, I was just aligning the science to fit the policy. Well, that's that's just nonsense. I mean, if they can make their policy decisions without following exactly what the science where it might make you go, because the executives have other sources of information and various things they're trying to do, but they shouldn't change the science itself. But they're doing that on a widespread basis, and we have to object to that. But of course, the scientists are concerned about their job and do not easily object to it, but I think that we have to do that.
You met with Vice President Dick Cheney?
Yes, I spoke with the 6 cabinet members on the Climate and Energy Task Force that the Vice President was the chair of in 2001.
And what did you tell him?
Well, at that time, we made clear that the climate was changing because of human-made changes in atmospheric composition, and that carbon dioxide was the primary cause of that, but there were other gases also that affect it. And we tried to give an indication of the kind of scenario for the future that we're going to need to follow if we're going to avoid disastrous climate effects over the next several decades.
And what was the response?
Well, the response, frankly, was the withdrawal of the U.S. from any agreements for